welcome back, everybody, to the Synagogue's XP podcast. I'm your host, Drew Richey, and we're continuing our journey through the executive ecosystem of church administration. In our previous episodes, we've explored budgeting and finances, human resources, and today we're diving into a topic that touches every aspect of church life, and that is communication strategy and systems. Effective communication is so important in all organizations. But for churches, I actually think it's particularly crucial. It's how we share the gospel. It's how we build community and mobilize our congregation for ministry. Yet in our digital age, with so many channels and so much noise, it's easier than ever for our messages to get lost or to get misunderstood. In this conversation, we'll explore the biblical foundations for effective communication. We'll discuss principles for crafting a strong communication strategy and provide practical steps for implementing robust communication systems in your church. Whether you're leading a small church plant or a large congregation, it's my hope that these insights today will help you communicate more effectively and efficiently. When we think about the importance of communication in the Bible, there's two powerful stories that personally stand out to me. The Tower of Babel from Genesis chapter 11, and then the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. These narratives, they offer for us contrasting examples of how communication can either divide or unite us. So let's start with this story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, because here we see humanity united in language and purpose, but their aim was self-glorification. In Genesis 11:14, they say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves." And so God's response to this is to confuse their language, making it impossible for them to understand each other. And the result is the project is abandoned, the people are scattered. Communication, it's such a powerful tool that when their communication was confused, not only was their project slowed down, but it was ultimately left in disarray. Now let's fast forward to the New Testament, the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And here we kind of see God undo Babel. We see the opposite occur. The disciples, they're filled with the Holy Spirit and they began to speak in other languages. And the miracle wasn't just in the speaking, but in the hearing. Acts 2:6 says, when they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. So people from all over the known world could understand the message in their own language. And the result is that about 3,000 people were added to the church that day because the disciples were empowered to communicate effectively to a diverse group of people. And this moment, it's a great unifier and a powerful tool for spreading the gospel in Jerusalem. And so to contrast these two events, it's really a striking comparison. At Babel, one language becomes many, leading to confusion. At Pentecost, many languages are understood as one, leading to clarity. At Babel, people are scattered. At Pentecost, people are gathered. At Babel, a human project is derailed. At Pentecost, God's mission is advanced. This comparison, it teaches us crucial lessons about communication in the church. One of them is that the purpose of our communication, it matters. How well we communicate, it doesn't matter if why we're communicating isn't God honoring and kingdom focused. We can have the best communication strategy and systems in the world, but unless God honors it, it's not going to have the impact that we're hoping for. And so when we think about communication, really we need to evaluate, are we seeking to make a name for ourselves or are we seeking to glorify God and advance His kingdom? Number two, the effective communication, it has the power to unify and mobilize people for God's purposes. Now think about your church. How many times have you experienced frustration or tension or conflict in your church, not because people disagree with the mission or the vision of your church, but because there were misunderstandings that existed because the communication was less than stellar? Now, I found that oftentimes people that can get the most frustrated in your church are people who are passionate about the vision of the church, but they just don't feel like they have what they need or what they want in order to be activated. And good communication has the power to unify and mobilize your church. And then number three, clear communication is a gift that can break down barriers and reach people where they are. Who we are communicating to, our intended audience, dictates what we're communicating and how we're communicating. Good communication can help tear down barriers and create connections in your church. So in many ways, what and how you communicate will determine who you reach. So as church leaders, our goal should be to communicate in a way that mirrors Pentecost rather than Babel. We want our messages to bring clarity and not confusion, to unite, not to divide, and ultimately to advance God's mission in the world, not our mission. So if we build on these biblical principles, I think there are some more practical principles that we can begin to draw on. And the first one is the importance of clarity in our messaging. Clarity is king in communication. I'll say that again. Clarity is king in communication. Your message should be so clear that it's nearly impossible to misunderstand. This doesn't mean oversimplifying or even dumbing things down, but rather distilling your message to its purest, most potent form. Think of it like refining gold, where you're removing impurities to reveal the most valuable part of what you're trying to communicate. In church communication, clarity often means cutting through theological jargon or insider language that might confuse newcomers. It means using concrete examples to illustrate abstract concepts. It's about finding the perfect balance between depth and accessibility. Remember, clarity, it's not just the words you choose, but also about the structure of your message. A clear message has a logical flow, with each point building on the last. It uses headings and bullet points or numbered lists when appropriate to organize information. Moreover, clarity extends your call to action. What do you actually want people to do with the information you're sharing? Make sure this is crystal clear when it comes to your call to action, whether it's to sign up for an event or to join a small group or to simply reflect on a biblical truth. Who you're communicating to, your audience, should never be left wondering, so what? What do you want me to do? Striving for clarity, it doesn't mean you can't be creative or poetic in your communication. Some of the most profound truths are communicated through stories and metaphors and vivid imagery, but the key is ensuring that your creativity serves your message. It doesn't obscure it. Ultimately, clear communication, it respects your audience's time and attention. It demonstrates that you've put the work in to understand and articulate your message so that they don't have to struggle to decipher it. When you communicate with clarity, you're not just transferring information, you're creating understanding. And so ask yourself, if someone heard only one thing from this communication, what should it be? That's your core message. Everything else should drive to that central point. Another really important principle is to know your audience. Just as Jesus tailored his message to his audience, often using agrarian parables or stories about farming that sometimes we completely miss, we need to understand who we're communicating to. This goes far beyond basic demographics like age or gender or marital status. To know your audience, you need to dive into their world. You need to understand their needs, their concerns, their spiritual maturity, their cultural context, and preferred communication channels. So consider the following aspects when getting to know your audience. Where are they at on their spiritual journey? Where are they at in their faith walk? Are they new believers, mature Christians, skeptics exploring faith? Where are they at in their life stage? What major life events or transitions are they experiencing? New parents will have different concerns than empty nesters or college students. What's their cultural background? What cultural influences shape their worldview and communication style? What personal challenges are they facing? What struggles or obstacles are they bumping into in their daily lives? What are their motivations and aspirations? What are their hopes, their dreams, their fears? What's their learning style? Do they prefer visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning? What's their tech savviness? How comfortable are they with digital communication tools? And their time availability? Are they time-pressed professionals, or are they retirees that maybe have a little more flexibility in their schedule? For example, the way we communicate about a youth event to teenagers will be vastly different from how you share information about a seniors ministry. With teens, you might emphasize the fun social aspects of an event, use more casual language, and communicate primarily through social platforms like Instagram or TikTok. For a seniors ministry, you might focus more on the fellowship and the spiritual growth aspects, use more traditional language, and communicate through a mix of in-person announcements, printed bulletins, perhaps an email. This is knowing your audience. And when you know your audience, you can speak their language both literally and figuratively. It enables you to use relatable examples and metaphors that resonate with their life experiences, and it helps you to choose then the right communication channel to communicate with them effectively. So moreover, when understanding your audience, it helps you anticipate and address their potential questions or objections. It allows you to frame your message in a way that connects with their specific needs and concerns. For instance, when inviting a busy parent to a church event, you probably want to emphasize the fact that you're providing childcare if you are. This addresses a key concern that might otherwise prevent them from participating. And remember, your audience isn't static. People's needs, preferences, their circumstances, things change over time. And so regularly reassessing and updating your understanding of your audience through surveys, conversations, and just observation should be a regular part of your rhythm. By truly knowing your audience, you can craft messages that not only inform, but also engage, inspire, and motivate. You're not just broadcasting information. You're initiating a meaningful dialogue that can lead to real connection and transformation in your church community. And the last real practical principle here is to avoid noise. And we do this by prioritizing our messaging. In our information-saturated world, less is often more because, man, we're constantly bombarded with messages from all directions: social media, emails, advertisements, more. How many emails a day do you just delete out? This overload of information has made attention a scarce and valuable resource. As church communicators, we need to be extremely intentional about what we communicate and when we communicate it. Now, the temptation that I see in a lot of churches is to treat every piece of information as equally important. However, not every announcement needs to be made from the pulpit. Not every event needs a church-wide email. Not every ministry update requires a social media post, because when everything is emphasized, nothing stands out. When everything is important, nothing is important. So here are some key principles for prioritizing your messages. Align your messaging with your vision. Prioritize messages that directly support your church's vision and current strategic goals. What are your most relevant messages? Consider who needs to know this information. A message that's only relevant to 10% of your congregation probably doesn't need to be communicated to everyone. Consider timeliness. Is this information needed now, or can it wait? Sometimes grouping several less urgent announcements together can be more effective than spreading them out. What's the impact we're looking for? What's the potential impact of the information? Messages that could significantly impact people's spiritual growth or involvement in the church should take precedence. And then what are the messages that require action? Messages that require people to take a specific step of action, like signing up for an event or volunteering. They need more prominence than purely just, hey, here's an FYI, an informational piece of communication. So by prioritizing your messages, you create a hierarchy or a tiers for communication that guide not only what you communicate, but how you communicate it. For example, highest priority messages should be announced from the pulpit, sent via email, posted on social media. Medium priority messages might be included in the bulletin and mentioned in small groups. Lower priority messages, they might only appear on the church website or in an app for those seeking that information. This approach, it helps avoid information overload and ensures that your key messages don't get lost in the noise. When you communicate less, but with more intention, your audience is actually more likely to pay attention and remember what's important. Remember, effective communication, it isn't just about disseminating information. It's about creating understanding and inspiring action. By carefully prioritizing your messages, you're more likely to achieve these goals and keep your congregation engaged and informed without overwhelming them. And so lastly, don't be afraid to repeat your most important messages. In the clutter of daily information, people often need to hear something multiple times before it sinks in. And so by prioritizing, you create space for this necessary repetition of key messages without drowning out everything else. So by understanding those key principles, we can actually now dive into 3 practical steps to help implement an effective communication strategy and system in your church. And so the first thing is to actually just develop a communication strategy. A communication strategy is your roadmap. It outlines what you want to communicate, to whom, how, when. Developing a comprehensive communication strategy begins with understanding your church's mission and vision. These foundational elements should be the North Star guiding all your communication efforts. And once you've grounded yourself in your church's purpose, the next crucial step is to examine your church calendar. This calendar will serve as the primary feed for your communication system, highlighting key events and sermon series and ministry activities that need to be communicated. With this foundation in place, identify your key audiences, longtime members, first-time visitors, the broader community, and then establish a clear hierarchy or tier system for your communication. This might include top-tier messages that receive full-scale promotion across all channels, mid-tier, then finally your lower priority information that's available on demand on your website or on your app. For each tier, carefully select the communication channels that will best reach your identified audiences. This might include a mix of traditional methods like pulpit announcements or modern approaches like social media, TikTok, even email at times. This tool will help you plan and organize your communication efforts, ensuring a steady, strategic flow of information that supports your church's mission. It aligns with your church calendar, it respects your established tiers, and engages your audience effectively across the chosen channels. Number 2 is to create a central hub for your information. Information silos, whether it's between adult ministries, children ministries, students or youth outreach ministries, information silos severely hinder effective communication within a church, which is why creating a central hub for all of your church information is crucial. This hub serves as a single source of truth accessible to all of your team members. It could be implemented through a shared digital workspace like Google Drive or a more specialized church management software. This central repository should house a comprehensive church calendar, detailed ministry descriptions along with contact information for key personnel, a library of communication templates to ensure consistency, brand guidelines to maintain a cohesive church identity, and important policies and procedures. By consolidating all of these elements down into one place, you ensure that everyone in your church leadership and on your church communication team is working from the same playbook. This centralization, it eliminates confusion, it reduces redundancy, and ensures that all team members have access to the most up-to-date information. So whether someone is crafting a social media post, they're planning an event, onboarding a new volunteer, they can quickly find the resources they need. This central hub, it becomes the backbone of your church's communication system, fostering alignment and efficiency across all ministry areas. So finally, number 3 is to actually establish a clear system. A clear communication system is the backbone of effective church messaging, answering critical questions about who communicates what and to whom and to when and how. This system should comprehensively outline who is in charge of different types of communication within the church structure. This is where a powerful tool like a DCI matrix, like we talked about in our human resources episode, comes into play. This matrix helps streamline the communication process and prevents confusion about who has the final say in various ministry areas or on various messages. Next, the system should establish approval processes detailing who needs to sign off on various communication before they're released to ensure accuracy and alignment with church values. It should also designate appropriate channels for different types of messages. For example, urgent news might be disseminated via text messages, while weekly updates are going to live in an email template. Lastly, The system should include comprehensive timelines, not only indicating when different types of communication should be sent out, but also when information needs to be submitted to create the communication effectively. For example, if a church needs to promote for an event for 3 weeks before it occurs, and it takes 2 weeks to create the necessary communication assets, writing copy, designing graphics, building out slides, then all the information for the event should be finalized and entered into the system at least 5 weeks before the event day. This backward planning approach ensures that there's adequate time for content creation, approval processes, and consistent messaging across all platforms. By establishing these clear timelines, churches can avoid last-minute rushes, maintain high-quality communication, and ensure that all team members understand when their input or action is required in the communication process. It's by implementing a thorough communication system, churches ensure consistency, clarity, and effectiveness in their communication across all platforms and to all audiences. Now, to wrap up today's episode, I know that was a lot to take in. I want to challenge you to take action on what we've discussed. I think it's easy to listen to a conversation like this and maybe feel inspired, but true change comes from actually implementing what we've talked about. So here are 3 concrete steps you can take this week to improve your church's communication. The first one is this: just take some time to assess your current communication practices. Take a step back and look at your church's communication with fresh eyes. Are your messages clear and easily understood by everyone, or are they filled with insider language? Are you tailoring your communication to different audiences, or are you using a one-size-fits-all approach? Are you prioritizing your messaging, or is everything treated with equal urgency? Just do an assessment, and it'll give you a starting point for where you can improve. Number 2, choose one area to improve and then implement one new strategy that we talked about today. Maybe it's just taking the time to develop and clarify a DCI matrix as it relates to your communication. Perhaps you'll work to create a central hub for your church and just begin to centralize all of your communication assets into one place. Or maybe it's just beginning to build out a communication strategy. Whatever you choose, commit to seeing it through all the way to implementation. Because remember, progress is better than perfection. And the last one is this: just gather feedback from your congregation about their experience with your church's communication. This is a crucial step to take sometimes, because we may think that we're doing good at communication, but unless it's being understood by our congregation or our audience, it doesn't really matter. So maybe just create a simple survey or have an informal conversation with more of a diverse group of people within your church and ask them, man, what's working well in our communication? What feels really clear to you? What are you confused about? Find out how they prefer to receive information. This feedback is going to be invaluable in shaping your communication strategy moving forward. Now remember, here at SXP, we're here to support you on this journey. And so you don't have to figure all this stuff out on your own. We have years of experience in church administration, in communication, and so we're ready to help you navigate these challenges. You can find us on social media at SynergosXP or online at SynergosXP.org. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need guidance or have questions about implementing any of these strategies. And remember, effective communication, it's a journey, it's not a destination. It requires ongoing effort, regular assessment, and a willingness to adapt. But the payoff, a more engaged congregation, a clearer understanding of your church's mission, and a greater impact in your community will always be worth the effort. So keep refining your approach, keep improving your systems, and keep connecting with your people. And so as you move forward, remember the lessons from Babel and Pentecost. Strive for communication that brings clarity, not confusion, that unites, not divides, and that ultimately advances God's mission in the world. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope today's conversation helped empower you and your church.